So it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Matt Ruscigno. Matt is a registered dietitian, has 2 degrees in nutrition, and over 20 years of experience with veganism. His expertise in helping individuals make the change to plant-based diets in a healthy, sustainable way. He's the past chair of the vegetarian group of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, co-author of No Meat Athlete with Matt Frazier, and Appetite for Reduction with Isa Moskowitz. He's also the co-creator of Strongest Hearts, a web series on vegan athletes, and he has a private practice in Los Angeles. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Matt Ruscigno.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Jeremy. Jeremy's done so much work. I think we should give him another round of applause, actually, here. It's really an honor to be here. So thank you, Jeremy. Thank you to all the organizers and everyone. And thank you guys for being here. You're probably tired being in the sun all day and stuff. I appreciate you coming in to hear my talk. The last one of the day is always hard. So thank you. And one thing I always say at VegFest is that I kind of have my feet in a couple different worlds because I'm a registered dietitian, so I have a formal education. I have 2 degrees in nutrition. And in that world where I do give talks, like I'm the weird radical vegan, right? Where I'm like the guy with the beard who wants people to eat no animal products, you know, and then I come to VegFest and things, and I'm the like weird formally educated guy, you know? And so I'm like criticized from both sides all the time. And I find it pretty funny. I mean, I don't mind personally, but it's definitely a unique perspective here to talk about this and talk about these. And what I hope from this is that you guys have some good, solid take-home points about nutrition. And that's what I want, because my main job, or how I see my job, is to help people who want to eat vegan or plant-based or near vegan or near plant-based have the skills to be able to do it. I want to help them to do it, and that is what most of my job is. So it kind of looks like this, right? We're like always dealing with all of these different components of nutrition, right? It's like every single person eats, and therefore, pretty much every single person has an opinion about nutrition and what you should and shouldn't eat. And so often when people hear what I do, they want to tell me their own philosophy. So I've sat through a lot of stuff, right? And then we have this here, and really if I had like a 5-second message, it would be eat more colorful fruits and vegetables. It really is one of the biggest things that you could do to be healthy, and we have the evidence to back it up. And you know, we're fortunate, like look how look how colorful this is. I've done a lot of public health work with kids in Los Angeles, and they like colorful things. They like colorful foods. To see a really red bell pepper is actually attractive to kids to eat, which is nice because it helps. But unfortunately, you know, we also have this, right? Very colorful, and with reason. And we have, I always find it funny or tragic, depending how you want to look at it, you know, that a lot of this stuff, you know, is like fruit-based, like fruit-flavored things that are far from fruit. And this is what a lot of people end up eating. Thank you so much. And then, so this is what makes our and my job hard. Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you. Everyone can hear me okay? Cool, thank you. And this makes our eating environment very difficult. It's like we want people to eat this, but then they see this and they're gravitated toward it. And then it's the same thing too with physical fitness. It's like this is really common, right? You see what this is, like going into 24-hour fitness and let's skip the stairs and take the escalator, right? It's as if our world was created for us to eat poorly and not get enough exercise, you know? And people who do these things like to say, it's so easy. You know, like there was an athlete panel earlier today, and I've been on some of those, and people will be like, being vegan and working out is easy, you just do it, and that's it, and you don't think about it. And it's like, for you, right? And those people are the exception. Right? People who eat really well and work out often are the exception. They are in a very small minority, and they don't realize that. So they tell people it's easy, and actually it's not. Our environment works against us because of this, right? I'm sure these poor guys on this escalator who I've embarrassed over many, many presentations, you know, they're trying to do the right thing, but our environment really leads us toward not doing the right thing. And the point of this talk here is to look at like what evidence we actually have about eating plant-based. You know, a lot of folks here, a lot of people who organize this event would eat vegan and would eat only plants even if it wasn't better for them, right? They're like, no, I don't want to kill animals, so therefore I'm going to eat vegan. But we're really fortunate that there's some evidence that says eating more plant foods is actually good for you. But first, let's look at the leading causes of death. You've probably all heard this. I'll go over this really quickly. The first two make up half of the reasons, right? Heart disease and cancer, right? This is what is killing people. And then the next couple, you know, lung disease, stroke, and accident. Lung disease mostly related to tobacco and environmental, but stroke also related to exercise and food. Accidents is another thing, and then now we're looking at, you know, only 4.9%, and then we get into, you know, the top 13 here. Alzheimer's, diabetes, hypertension, all related to what we eat and the amount of physical activity we get. That and tobacco are the three biggest indicators toward what you're going to die of. So more than half leading causes of death are directly related to diet and exercise, about 1.3 million deaths per year. But I think even more importantly is the quality of life, right? And a lot of folks think they get a disease and that's it. And they're like, well, you know, there's a saying in Spanish, it's si Dios quiere, if God wants, and it's this idea that if you get type 2 diabetes, it's just what happened, you know? And there's actually a lot that we can do. And I think that we don't know this and we don't see this, and so we haven't been able to address it because of this way of thinking. And so it's tragic and it's sad, right, that people get these diseases that are large part preventable. So it is a powerful thing, right? It's tragic that people are dying and millions of people have diabetes and heart disease and or cancer, but that also means there's a lot that we can do. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit here to be able to help these folks. And so understanding risk factors, I think that this is a big one here. It's about reducing risk, right? You can't say in a science-based way, this hamburger will give you a heart attack. It doesn't work that way. No one thing at one time, I mean, it's not like poison or like, right, can do that. Right? But it's about reducing your risk. And the way you would say that is like eating a double bacon cheeseburger increases your risk for raising your cholesterol, which is a risk factor for heart disease, which, you know, doesn't make a good meme, right? But that's what it's about, and that's what about eating plants is about, and understanding this. It's not exact causation, okay? And then it's risk factors for increasing the likelihood of developing a disease or disorder. That's the way to look at this. And so some we can't change, right? Age is one, right? The older you get, the more likely you are to get one of these leading causes of death. Can't do anything about that. But other ones we can, and that's the nutrition and exercise related ones. And so I like to point to the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is my professional organization that I'm in for dietitians. They are not a progressive organization in any way, okay? But they have a position paper on vegetarian diets, and it says that if they're appropriately planned, including vegan diets, are healthful, nutritionally adequate, and may provide health benefits in the prevention and treatment of certain diseases. This is a really strong statement from a very conservative nutrition organization. It's the only organization of nutrition professionals that exists, and this is their position on it. And also that it's appropriate for individuals during all stages of the life cycle, including pregnancy, and then young children, teenagers, and then the rest of the statement is also athletes as well, can indeed be vegan. So we have this evidence, and we have actual research. So vegetarians have been under-researched for decades, a really long time. You know, paleo doesn't have that, right? They haven't been following people who eat paleo for 20 years to see what diseases they get, right? That just hasn't happened, right? I mean, the longest anyone's eaten paleo could possibly only be, what, like 8 years or something, right? Or 10 years. Like, we just don't have the evidence on paleo diets, but for vegetarians, we do. And so one of them is this Adventist Health Study 2, which is a cohort of 100,000 people. It's one of the biggest cohorts ever put together for research in the history of the world. It's incredible. And about half of those folks are vegetarian. Seventh-day Adventism is a type of Christianity where the way that they interpret the Bible says that you should be a vegetarian. So about half of their followers take this to heart and are vegetarian, and about 10% are vegan, which is interesting because the first Adventist Health Study, which was in the 80s and 90s, only 3% were vegan. So they've seen a more than 300% increase in the number of vegans, and I think they're ahead of the curve. I mean, these were people who were making like alternative meat products 100 years ago. You know, so it's funny when people are like, oh, a vegan cheesesteak, what do they think of next? It's like, well, the Adventists have been doing it for over 100 years, and some Buddhists in China for hundreds more than that. But Adventists are ahead of the curve here in North America with this. And another one is this Oxford EPIC study where it's a cohort like the Adventist one where they sought out vegetarians and vegans to follow them, see what they eat, and see what diseases they get, see what they die of, right? And this data is collected and used by different researchers to look at. And so you'll see there's been hundreds of published studies from the Adventist Health Study that goes and looks at this data and says, well, what about stroke? What about African Americans? What about hypertension? What about these specific foods? And they dip into this data. And the data looks very good for people who are eating plant-based, vegetarian or vegan. So lower body mass index, blood pressure, total cholesterol, and fasting glucose. That's great. This is great evidence that people who eat plant foods have lower of all of those. So then therefore, lower rates of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and some cancers. And so what are these mechanisms? Whenever you see someone make a claim, right, because you could say like, you know, people who wear red shirts are less likely to wait as long in a waiting room. You know, it's like, well, what would be the mechanism there, right? Why would that be true? And so with this, we can say, well, why would vegetarians and vegans have these health outcomes? Well, we can look at fiber as one, and we can look at phytochemicals and antioxidants, which are only found in plant foods, and we can look at lower saturated fat. There's decades of evidence that says these mechanisms lead to better health outcomes. And so in Los Angeles, I worked for this, we'll call them an organization called Network for Healthy California that was funded through the food stamp program, which is funded through the USDA. And my vegan friends would say, oh, the USDA, don't you know they're terrible and they're funded by the dairy and meat industry? And I would say, yeah, sure. But my program, working in food stamp eligible populations, the goal was to increase the amount of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and beans that those folks ate, from kids to parents to teachers. Right? And this is a program through the USDA because they know this works. They know these positive health outcomes exist. And so American Heart Association is another example. Choose foods like vegetables, fruits, whole grains, low-fat dairy most often. American Diabetes Association, fill the largest section of your plate with non-starchy vegetables. And so I put this up here to say, look, eating a lot of plant foods is a science-based, normal thing to do. Right? And we come to something like this, and if it's new to you, you're at a VegFest, and you're like, just thinking of all the things you can't eat, right? But really, from a science perspective, these organizations are saying, we want you to eat more plant food. And they don't say you should be plant-based, they don't say you should be vegan. There's definitely a different thing than saying you should eat mostly plant foods and saying you shouldn't have leather shoes, right? Those are different things. But when we're talking about diet, you know, we're talking about a very vegan-ish plant-based diet. And we can even go back to this old ad here. I don't know when this is from, maybe the 40s or 50s. Toughen up, Americans. Vegetables build strong bodies, strong minds, strong hearts. Isn't this cool? Right? Like we should have this ad now, right? The USDA should have a $10 million campaign with this so people eat more vegetables. And they do spend some money on this, just not that much and not enough. You know that the average vegetable consumption in the US is 2.4 servings per day, right? And a serving of vegetables, of cooked vegetables, is only half a cup. So we're getting 2.4 servings per day on average. That's incredibly small, and it's even worse when you know that that includes French fries, right? Because French fries are a vegetable, right? They come from a potato. And that is the #1 consumed vegetable, is French fries. Right? So we are eating in a terribly small amount, right? 2.4 servings per day on average. And you know, there's the 5-a-day campaign. The 5-a-day campaign is a compromise. Really, people should be eating 9 or more servings per day. But public health experts said, we're going to overwhelm people if we say 9. We can't say 9. We have to say 5. Let's get them incrementally there. But really, the research says people should be eating 9 or more servings of fruits and vegetables a day, which makes it very plant-based. And so unfortunately, it looks a little bit more like this. I won't go into too much detail here. Just know that this 12% are the plant foods that people eat. This is, again, on average here. So 12% of the average diet is plant foods, but half of that is, plant foods in processed foods. Like if you eat a Snickers bar, there are peanuts in there, right? You're technically eating peanuts, which are a plant food, but half of this 12% is in, I'll have some peanuts. It's in a Snickers bar. And so it's plant foods that are in other processed foods. And so it's pretty sad, right? And so we have a lot of work to do. How many people have seen this? This is a little bit old. Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine made this. I won't spend too long on it, but it's a critique of the USDA that says, look, this is what you want people to eat, and this is a little bit older. We don't use the pyramid anymore. But they're saying you should eat grains, and then vegetables and fruits, and then your protein, which includes, some meat and dairy and legumes, and then these other things. But this is what the farm subsidy funds. Look at this, meat and dairy, meat and dairy. And it's like, why is a salad so expensive? Well, this is why. These products are subsidized, right? The farm bill is a $1 trillion bill, which is where our tax money goes to. And a lot of it goes to meat and dairy. Because meat and dairy and the farmers who produce these things have been alongside nutrition since it was a science, and then also the USDA since it existed. I mean, I went to Penn State University. It's a land-grant university. What that means is the university was created in 1855 to help farmers, right? So these things are integrated. It's not a conspiracy. I think some vegans really get into this conspiracy about the USDA, and it's not. It's just that it's the way it's existed for over 100 years. And so these things are subsidized, and these aren't. Look, vegetables and fruits, 1/3 of 1% of that money. Right? But yet, these are the things we should be eating. And this is what the USDA says we should be eating, but this is what the tax money goes toward. And that's why it's hard. It's hard to eat healthy. If you've ever struggled with it and you feel terrible, it's because it's really difficult to eat well in the US. And sure, you can find it, and I'm sure if you went to one of the booths and asked, someone would say, no, you just go to Whole Foods, or you can go to this ethnic market, or you go to this restaurant that's down this alley, right? Because you can figure it out. It's true, but it's more work. It takes extra effort. So nutrient density, many nutrients with fewer calories. If you eat lots of plants, you get lots of nutrients. And when I speak to dietitians, I say, look, there are a lot of nutrients in plants. So when you raise your hand and say, well, what about calcium? I can say back to you, the leafy greens that have calcium in them. I'm saying eat more of them. These are nutrient-dense foods, and that's a good thing. But it's all about serving size, and that is the real difference. And this is one thing, and I work with a lot of vegan athletes, and new vegan athletes, and they say, oh my God, I'm so hungry and I don't have the energy. Is it this diet? And I say, well, how much are you eating? Are you eating enough, right? Oh, you're hungry at work? You snacked on an apple? How about you have 3 apples, right? We don't think of it that way. We think of, when I ask people, I taught college, and I would say to my students, who eats vegetables? Oh, I eat vegetables. How much broccoli do you eat? And it's this tiny, tiny little bit, right? And if you ate 4 times as much, you would get 4 times as many nutrients, right? That's the way the math works. It's pretty simple. But we don't think of it that way because we're taught that they're only on the side. And so it's about serving size. So iceberg lettuce isn't only water. An extreme example is I worked with a raw food guy who was training for the Olympics, and he would eat a gigantic iceberg lettuce for dinner, lettuce salad. Between him and his wife, they split a giant bowl that was 8 heads of iceberg lettuce, okay? And so they were eating 40 servings of iceberg lettuce. And so if you're only getting 2% of your iron from a serving, which is nothing, but you times that by 40, suddenly he's getting 80% of his iron needs from iceberg lettuce, right? And that's just the way the math works. And that's an extreme example. Don't leave here saying I told you to eat 40 servings of iceberg lettuce. There are other ways and easier ways to get it, but we can look at this extreme example and say, it's not only water. And so back to the benefits that I talked about early on, a big one is fiber. Fiber. And really, there are some public health programs that just focus on helping people to eat more fiber. Fiber's only in plant foods. And if they found that people who just eat more fiber, and I'm not talking about like the powdered brand that you can get at like Sprouts or whatever, you can actually just get it from plants. So I guess this is technically wrong. It's only found in plant foods or supplements, but naturally only found in plant foods. So it adds bulk. It helps you feel full, which is a good thing. And it also helps you to eat less. So if we imagine that like the fibers are this is a very technical here picture. So the fiber are the triangles and the calories are the circles, right? You add more fiber and you're taking up space in your stomach, right? And so that's a good thing if folks want to lose a little bit of weight, but then it's also difficult if you're a vegan athlete, for example, because collectively we get such a small amount of fiber. The recommendations are 25 to 35 grams per day. The average American gets 12, right? Which isn't very much fiber at all. I mean, if Americans doubled their fiber intake, we would see a huge reduction in those diseases I talked about, just simply by doubling fiber from 12 to 25 grams. I mean, we would save billions of dollars just with that one thing. And I'm not saying like, oh, stop eating meat, eliminate dairy, add blueberries, like just doubling fiber wherever it came from, which would be plant foods, we would save billions of dollars, right? It's really that simple. Like fiber is a huge part of it. Eases elimination, I think you know what that means. And lowers disease risk. Fiber is associated with reduction in disease for almost all of the major chronic diseases. So it's fortunate, right? You care about animals and you say, okay, now what do I eat? Well, here are your options. They're plant foods. Well, they're filled with fiber, and we have these benefits. So there's a difference, though, between whole grain and white grain, and I won't go over all of this, but mostly the nutrients and the fiber are in this outer part here. Right? And then when you go from a whole grain to a white grain, you're taking out the beneficial parts. You're just removing them, right? So it's like, oh, cool, here are all the nutrients and the fiber. Let's get rid of it. And then just eat this part. And that's what we do. And so this could be flour, this could be rice. For any of those, you're taking out the good parts. There's even some vitamin E in there. There's all sorts of stuff. This is where the phytochemicals are, and we remove it. And so people just switching from white grain to whole grain would be a huge benefit. And at the time when I finished school, we used to say like, oh, eat brown bread instead of white bread, because brown bread is whole grain and white bread is not. But then bread companies started adding molasses to white bread because it's brown and then it looks like whole grain, right? And so it makes it a little more complicated. But yeah, just simply eating whole grains, you're adding all this beneficial stuff. And so the next part is phytochemicals. So they're non-nutrients, right? And so there's beneficial compounds that are found in plants. So it's the color of carrots, right? Creatively, they're called carotenoids. And garlic, for example. It's like my Italian grandmother used to say garlic is really good for you. And now we have the science that backs it up, because garlic is filled with these phytochemicals. And so they're not nutrients. By definition, a nutrient is something you have to have. You don't have to have phytochemicals, but we found that they are indeed beneficial. So they're damaged by food processing. You can't take a supplement because there's some sort of synergy that happens. My mother's heard about the benefits of garlic and said, oh, should I take a supplement? And I'm like, you eat more garlic than anyone. You're already doing it. Forget the supplement, right? Everyone wants to take a supplement all the time. And it's like, no, just eat the actual garlic. Right? There are benefits to eating garlic. And so there's more than we know. This really is the future of research, of the nutrition field, right? We've cured scurvy. People aren't dying of scurvy, right? Even the most unfortunate, limited resources people in our country are getting enough vitamin C somehow, right? And so the future of my field really is looking at phytochemicals, and they're found in plants. And so I like to say that all plant foods are superfoods, right? You don't have to eat goji berries or acai, right? Like I've done talks where, someone will raise their hand and say, this is all totally new to me, I want to be vegan, and that's why I came, And then the presentation will end and someone will go right over to them and say, okay, here's everything you need to know. And they'll be like, You have to get acai, you have to order it online, you have to buy a $400 blender, there's these mushrooms from the Andes Mountains that cure cancer, and I'm just, no, like those things aren't true, right? The research that I pointed to earlier, those Adventists that are living longer, if you've ever heard vegans live 7 years longer than omnivores, that comes from the Adventist health study I mentioned earlier on. And it's true, and we have the data to look at that. And we can say these people are eating this, and they're living longer. We have that information. We don't have data on goji berries or acai. It just doesn't exist. So like, are these things good for you? Yes, they are, sure. But are apples and bananas, right, and strawberries, like these foods that are more available and more affordable, are there, and they exist, and they're just as beneficial. So purple cabbage is an example. They have two types of phytochemicals, these glucosinolates and polyphenols, and so it's two separate categories that are both really good for you. Polyphenols, oh geez. Okay. Polyphenols are the type of phytochemical that are in soy, right? And so soybeans have isoflavones in them. And there's a lot of research on soy, right? There's an actual FDA statement that says soy reduces your risk for heart disease. It is not easy to get an FDA statement, right? It takes 10 years of research. They do not make those statements easily. And there is one on soy that says soy is indeed good for you. It does indeed reduce your risk for heart disease. And that is partly because of these polyphenols. Well, you can also get them in purple cabbage, which most people know as something that comes on your dish to make it look pretty, right? And you don't eat it. It just gets pushed to the side, right? It's cheap. It's easy to use. You can add it to salads raw. You can add it to stir fries. You know, you can get a big head of purple cabbage for about $3. And I don't know how many servings there are in there, but probably like 20 or 30 servings, right? And it's cheap, and then your cost per serving is very low. And here it has these very beneficial compounds. And so this really is the future of nutrition. Like, this is the direction it's going in. So they've identified 25,000 different phytochemicals. And so here's just obviously a very small sample. The carotenoids I mentioned, lycopene, which you may have heard of thanks to the ketchup industry, right? Because it's in tomatoes and then therefore in ketchup, and they want you to buy more ketchup, right? And you can get it from ketchup. So ketchup and iceberg lettuce, okay, that's what you're gonna leave here with. But you can also get it straight from the tomatoes, right? And it is a phytochemical that may help reduce your risk for cancer. And then the isoflavones I mentioned, and then like flavonoids in cacao. I actually worked on a book on cacao and chocolate, and the only reason I was willing to work on that project was because there's a lot of evidence that these flavonoids are they are health promoting. And so here you have just some different colors of carrots, and people like to always ask, like, you know, what the different health benefits are. And the answer really is that because they're different colors, they have different phytochemicals in them. And that's why the red cabbage from the previous slide is slightly better than the green cabbage that people get, because it has different types of phytochemicals based on their color. So again, eating colorful food. So the question that always comes up here is about protein, right? You know, you say vegan and people say protein. And it's this obsession, and it has a lot to do with the dairy industry being a part of the nutrition field for so long, so absolutely just integrated in it. And I like to answer this by saying, when people ask this, I say, well, what about the other nutrients? Protein is just one nutrient, right? Where do you get your zinc, in an omnivorous diet? What about magnesium? Where do you get your magnesium, right? And why haven't we heard this, right? Why don't we see commercials talking about our potassium intake? 90% of Americans don't get enough potassium. Potassium is important in keeping your blood pressure low. That's a problem. Hypertension is a risk factor for all the major cardiovascular diseases, right? If people increase their potassium, we'd probably see a reduction in disease. But no, we're talking about protein over and over. And it has to do with, partly with the dairy industry and the meat industry, and just like feeding into what people already think. you know? And so I'd feel bad not covering this here. So plant-based protein, you know, all whole plant foods contain all of the essential amino acids. Okay, they are there. So legumes, whole grains, and more. You don't have to combine protein. You don't, right? Protein is an umbrella term for amino acids. There are ones that are essential, but you can get them in plant foods, and you don't have to eat them together. It makes sense to eat beans and rice, right? Instead of just eating, you know, I don't know, I'm gonna have black beans for breakfast and then just plain rice for lunch, you know? But like, you could do that, and your body pulls the amino acids, and you will get them, right? It's just, you don't have to eat them together. It just kind of like makes sense, right, the way that we eat. And so I think the term incomplete protein is actually quite misleading, you know, and I think we should stop using this term. Because it's this idea that, oh, this is incomplete and this is complete. And that's almost like good and bad, right? And so it's like animal protein good, plant protein bad because of the protein issue. And I think that we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't use it, and we don't need to. You know, there are some issues with digestion. Some plant protein isn't digested as well as animal protein. That is true, you know, but that doesn't mean that we can't get an adequate amount from plant foods. So here's just a short list of you know, the protein availability from all of these different foods. This is from the Vegetarian Resource Group, which I think I have on the end as a website. You know, this is available in lots of places. Though I do recommend if you are looking for this, you go to a reliable source. I definitely have seen quite a lot of things shared from vegan groups that just isn't true. You know, and they just like didn't have an expert fact-checking these things before they go out. So if you do look this up, you know, I look for a good source, and I have some of those toward the end. You probably don't need this. I find this really funny, hyperbolic mass. It's like, I don't know if they were being like really funny or self-aware, talking about like the hyperbole of like of this idea of needing this protein, right? You don't need protein powder. You know, unless you're like of a really specific circumstance, most people just don't need it, even if you're an athlete. And so I'm only covering a couple nutrients here, and the second one is iron. So if you're eating plant-based, if you're eating vegan, you do need more iron. That is absolutely true. So like non-heme iron, which is the iron that's found in plants, is less well absorbed. So like your paleo friend or frenemy that you argued with on Facebook, like is right. Like it is true, it is not as well absorbed. So you do need more of it. But if you eat a variety of sources, it increases absorption. One of the best things you can do to increase iron absorption is eat a little bit throughout the day. Well, guess what? With plant foods, you're getting less than you are from meat, but you're getting it throughout the day. And then here, bonus, if you have vitamin C at the same time, and vitamin C can be in any fruits or vegetables, some leafy greens and whatnot, it increases absorption up to 5 times. It's huge. It's huge, right? And so the deal with iron isn't about how much you eat, it's about how much you absorb. And so like popping that one iron pill with your coffee in the morning, like doesn't cut it. Your absorption is really low because you're taking so much. But you get a little bit throughout the day, and you increase absorption that way, and then you have it with some vitamin C. So like the beans and rice that I mentioned earlier, right? What goes well with beans and rice? Well, salsa, just tomatoes, which is vitamin C. Right? Which helps you absorb the iron that's in that brown rice and that's in those black beans, right? It's like folks who have been eating that for generations, like figured it out without knowing any of that, like, and it's delicious, right? Like, why wouldn't you add salsa to your rice and beans? And so here's just the iron content of selected foods. You know, please don't try to write this down. Here's just some examples, right? Your average male needs 12 milligrams and female needs 18 milligrams per day. And so you can see that these numbers can add up pretty quick. Like a cup of cooked spinach really isn't that much, right? You know, if you're eating a big stew or something, it's easy to get a cup of iron, and it's a third for the day. And so it's not including the other things that are in there, you know, which could very well be some chickpeas, you know? Chickpeas and spinach go really well together. Or lentils. You know, I heard earlier on the sports panel, they were talking about lentils. Lentils are an excellent food. You know, if you wanted to leave here with like some foods I recommend, it really is lentils, quinoa, and kale. Like those are excellent foods. They're healthy, they're easy to cook, you can mix it up. Lentils are super cheap, they don't need to be soaked, they're very high in protein, right? Just simplicity. And so this is sort of a review of what I've been saying. Eating smaller amounts increases absorption. Fruits and vegetables, it's important to have big portions. The phytochemicals, it's the non-nutritive benefits. So you have 2 things to do with your eating. 1, get all the nutrients you need. 2, eat in a way that prevents prevents disease or lowers your risk. And so phytochemicals help with that second one. But unfortunately, we see things like this here. There's like health claims on junk food, like marshmallow pebbles for your vitamin D, right? It's like, really, marshmallow pebbles? And they got in trouble for this, and then they also got in trouble for this here. Eat Rice Krispies to support your child's immunity, right? And it's like, really, refined rice with sugar? Like, that's what's good for kids' immunity? You know, and they also got in trouble for this as well. But they're gonna keep pushing it, right? They pay a little fine, right? And they keep doing it, but this makes it difficult. This makes eating well difficult because we see these messages all the time. And sort of side note, Kellogg's was started by Dr. Kellogg, which was an Adventist, and part of his invention of breakfast cereal was as an alternative to bacon and eggs. It was a plant-based alternative for breakfast, and that's how cereal came about. And then we have these supplement alternative companies, and sometimes I feel bad when I give this talk at really big VegFest, and there are all these booths with all these companies selling like acai juice and like all sorts of things and like all these protein powders. And I think that these alternative companies, you know, they're a billion-dollar industry as well. Right? Everyone wants to like denigrate the dairy and meat industry all the time, but then these companies that sell supplements are billion-dollar industries, right? And they add to the confusion, in my opinion. You know, they're opportunistic. They prey on the mistrust and the unhappiness in difficult environment, you know, and they sell these quick fixes. And I think that adds to the problem. You know, that when you go into Whole Foods or a health food store and they're pushing all these supplements and all these powders and all these elixirs, and you don't need most of them. You know, and my goal sort of is to get veganism out of the weird pseudo-health world. You know, let's make it science-based, and let's look at the science that says like, yeah, people should be eating more plant foods, and you can be healthy. And here, and now I feel bad having this in here because my friend works at this restaurant, but this is a New York Times article about a vegan restaurant in Los Angeles that says, you can eat dinner. Everything is raw, vegan, organic, soy-free, gluten-free, right? So all these extra things, right? They're like, oh, no soy and no gluten. It has to be raw, right? And then have your colon cleansed right through that door. Is this the veganism that we want? It's like, no, we don't. Most people can eat gluten. Most people can eat soy. Organic and raw are different things. Right? Organic and vegan are not the same. And you know, we can have 10 experts up here and talk about organic, and we would have 10 different perspectives. And your influence on getting a disease, if it's organic or not, the evidence really isn't there, which I know is a controversial statement. But I think organic is a political and human rights issue, right? But for when it comes down to our food that we're actually eating, you know, it doesn't affect those leading causes of diseases as much as the other things, simply eating fiber. You know, so then we have this, how going vegan triggered this Instagram star's orthorexia, right? And so, you know, she was like God, it feels funny to even say Instagram star. I can like barely bring myself to say that. But she became famous through Instagram and was vegan and then stopped being vegan because it was unhealthy, right? Unhealthy. And so she like wrote a big book called Breaking Vegan. Does anyone know? Breaking Vegan, I think, yeah. And so like she was on all these talk shows, she was on the Today Show about how she saved herself from veganism, right? Which is nonsense, right? Because you can be healthy and eat vegan. But if you're saying you have to be raw and vegan and organic and soy-free and gluten-free and get your colon cleansed, like it's adding all these extra things, right? That had this poor woman who, if you know she did have an eating disorder, that is a different thing. It's not veganism. And so, you know, my point of this whole talk here is like, look, we don't want to go in this direction because things like this happen, you know? So let's make it a little science-based. Let's talk a little bit more about what the actual research says. And just so, I have a couple more slides here, just so you know that I want to leave you with some specifics. The way that I imagine creating plant-based meals is grains, beans, vegetables with a preference on leafy, and then nuts and seeds, right? And a lot of people around the world eat this way, right? You have like a whole wheat pita with falafel and then tomatoes and a tahini sauce, right? Or you have pasta with tomato sauce, with broccoli and spinach and zucchini, and then maybe some garbanzo beans or cannellini beans, right? It's this grain, bean, vegetable with a sauce. And if we think of food that way, you know, it's really makes it much easier. You know, and sure, like breakfast, it's like oatmeal with blueberries and walnuts, and then the sauce could be like peanut butter or something, right? Or maybe that doesn't need a sauce, or maybe soy milk, right? And it's this way of creating plant-based meals that's easy. And so I think the emphasis should be on whole foods and variety, but it doesn't have to be totally whole foods, right? People say, oh my God, I eat meat alternatives, I eat vegan meats, and I feel so terrible. Right? And I get clients who come to me and say that, and then I look at their diet record and they're eating tons of produce. They're eating really well. But then maybe they add some field roast to their pasta. That's okay. That's okay. We don't have the specificity in research to say that you can't eat this or you can't eat this one thing. It's about what you do most of the time. And if you're eating all these plants that I talked about in previous slides and then adding some fake meat, there's no research that says that is therefore unhealthy. And those Adventists who live 7 years longer, and I know a lot about Adventists because I went to an Adventist public health university for graduate school, and they had a store, and it's filled with canned fake meat. So like actual vegan hot dogs in a can. And that's what a lot of them eat, right? But it is in addition to eating the whole grains and the beans and the produce. So fruit and salads can be meals. I learned this from my raw food friends. You know, you can eat a gigantic salad. You can have, you know, I eat like a mashed banana and apple and peanut butter breakfast. And it's like mostly fruit. And you can eat enough of that to make it a meal. You know, that doesn't mean you have to be raw, but you can eat more of these whole foods as meals. I did an Ironman race in Northern California. And the day after, I was at my cousin's house, and she had, you know, called some of our family to come over and eat, and I was with a friend who was raw, and he was making a salad. And another cousin comes over and goes, whoa, that's a lot of salad. You know, there's only 8 of us. And he looks at her and says, no, this is just mine. So, right, in her mind, it was too much for 8 people, and it was his lunch, right? And so you can eat big salads, right? And it's very subjective. And that's what makes my job really hard, because people are always like, oh, I eat healthy, I eat vegetables, and that means a different thing to every person, right? What exactly is a big salad? How big is a big salad, right? And that's something to think about. Like most of us could eat more of these things. So again, I guess I got ahead of myself. These like meat and cheese alternatives as complements. Right? Just like real meat, right, historically was only on the side, maybe the same with these, right? And then I travel a lot, and it's like, oh, cool, vegan pizza with homemade sausage on it? Like, sure, why not, right? Because I'm eating whole foods most of the time. And so again, don't overly restrict. It's one of the biggest problems I see. People restrict, right? They go vegan, and then they start eliminating all these other things. And then they overly restrict, and then they have health issues, or they're hungry all the time, and then they go back. It's one of the biggest problems I see. So it's what you eat, not what you don't eat, right? Does that make sense? So it's not about eliminating the meat and dairy as it is what you're replacing it with. And if you did, and I know vegans like this, you could go a whole entire day without eating a single vegetable, right? It's just like cornflakes with soy milk, and then what else, like a veganese like tofurkey on white bread sandwich, and then dinner just white pasta and like field roast, and then like some ice cream for, you know, vegan ice cream for dessert, right? It's like, wow, you didn't eat a single vegetable, congratulations, right? But it's vegan, right? And so it's there. And I think it's going to be interesting in the next like 20 to 30 years, as there are like, quote, junk food vegans, they probably won't see the health benefits that we've seen historically, right? But it's a range. It's a range, right? And that would be the far end. And then on this end is the person who's like, no, cooked foods damages the enzymes and throws off the pH, or like some other nonsense, right? And like that's way over here of being like really strict. And it's somewhere in the middle. It's just eating mostly whole foods. And so this is sort of the practical, shop more often, make time for the grocery store, right? The grocery store can actually be fun. Frozen and canned is fine, right? You can eat these things. They're just about eating the vegetables, eating the beans. Like, sure, I try to do organic beans that are dry that I soak overnight, absolutely. But sometimes I have to eat canned. Bulk bins are good. Explore ingredient substitutions in your favorite dishes, right? That's one way to help people. If you have like a friend who asks about Meatless Monday, don't give them a book that's, the animal ingredients A to Z, just like help them replace the things in their meals that they like, So explore ethnic markets. This was really, really helpful to me. I went vegan in the 90s, and I was just like, what in the world do I eat? And so I started going to Lebanese markets and Indian markets and Thai markets, and there was this whole world of plant foods, right? And it's still like one of my favorite things to do is explore these different markets that have all sorts of produce that you've never heard of, and you could pick something up and find somebody and say, excuse me, what is this and how do I eat it, right? And maybe it's the best thing in the world, or as happens, maybe it's terrible, right? Just not for your tastes, right? And so there's all sorts of food out there, So when we think of vegan, it's not this narrow thing. It's actually really wide. I started eating way more foods. So cooking details, I'm almost done here, guys. So have 5 really solid meals, right? People think, that they eat this huge variety, and they don't. People eat the same things all the time, And so I like to say, have 5 really solid meals in your rotation. Make it easier. Make food in big batches. You could freeze things. If you want to be, if you want to expand, pick 1 new dish a week. That's it. Don't expect to do it every day. Come home and like create a whole new meal from scratch. That's a lot of work. What I like to do is, because I do travel a lot, like I get home tomorrow and then I leave again on Thursday, and it's really easy to just eat out. But what I do to kind of trick myself, as soon as I get home, I start water for a grain. And then the process of eating dinner at home has already started. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to walk to a Thai place because I already have the water on, so I might as well make rice and then figure it out from there, right? It just helps you to cook at home. Starting is the hardest part. A lot of what I do is behavior change, right? It's like the field of public health is about changing people's behaviors. Starting is the hardest part, right? The first time you make a new dish is the hardest time. It'll get easier after that. And then you don't even need the recipe anymore. And then you've adapted it, and then you've realized, I don't have this ingredient. Well, I can just use this, and I can just do that, right? It's just starting is the hardest part with anything. That's why I cringe a little when people say, going vegan is easy, and then they give you a list of 10 things you have to do, right? It's like, well, it's easy for you because you're already doing it. But when something is new, it is difficult. And I think that those of us who are advocates for eating this way need to remember. We need to remember that starting is the hardest part for anyone. I have this example here. I work with a group of other vegetarian and vegan dietitians, and we make these handouts. And this is one that I wrote called Eat More Plant-Based Meals, which is just a really simple handout with a lot of ideas that were in this presentation. And so those resources are available here at vegetariannutrition.net. So they're just full color PDFs that can be downloaded and printed out. You can read them online. So we have a bunch of them. We have ones for calcium and for iron and for vegetarian teenagers. And so all of those are available, and they're free, and they're written by experts on the topic. So it's like for B12, we found an expert on B12 who's a researcher to write what vegans should know about B12. So it's all about getting good resources. And that's true here for these books as well, which are written by some colleagues of mine, and these are my favorite. I'll comment on veganhealth.org. Here is Jack Norris's site. So Jack Norris, the author of Vegan for Life. This is a very technical site, like new studies, all of the research, looking at all of these things. It's excellent. Like, I'll be honest, it's like my cheat sheet. It's like if I get a really technical question or like a really difficult client, I go to veganhealth.org, and it's all free and it's accessible, and you can read the same research that I go to read, and you can really go down that rabbit hole of seeing what's out there. And then, so this is my last slide. Back to the simplicity thing. This is from the U.S. Food Administration, which predates the USDA, in 1917, so right almost 100 years ago. Food, buy it with thought, cook it with care, use less wheat and meat, buy local foods, serve just enough, use what is left, don't waste it. This is great, right? It's like really good advice from 100 years ago, right? And so like they could do this campaign right now and it would make sense. And you wouldn't even have to pay like consultants millions of dollars to design it or think of it. It's like, this is still a good message. I mean, in this message, 1917, there were nutrients that weren't discovered yet, right? This is like the early on in nutrition as a science, is 1917. And this is what they were saying then. And it's like, wow, this is still really good advice. So it's about keeping it simple. keeping it simple, if I haven't said that enough times. So. And that's it. That is the end of mine. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thanks.